She was appointed Executive Secretary of the UN Framework Convention on Climate Change 6 months after the failed COP15 in Copenhagen. And during the next 6 years, she worked to rebuild the global climate change negotiation process leading to the 2015 Paris Agreement, which was, of course, widely recognized as a historic achievement. Please welcome Christiana Figueres. We changed the whole stage for you.
I very much appreciate
it.
I have to tell you, I walked in here and I saw these 2 tall things that looked like the Alpine mountains that I, as a small woman with a dress, was supposed to climb up on.
Yeah.
And so
that's typical Delft. Yeah.
I'm sorry.
Yeah.
Yes, there are no small women in Delft, I understand.
No, there used to be no women at all, so it's... It's actually improving.
But I'm highly appreciative of the change of scenario.
Yeah. Okay, let's be serious now, because what you...
Why?
Yeah, okay. Because what you do is very serious and impressive.
This is true.
Good. You dedicate more or less your life to this cause of climate change. Let's start with your motivation for that. Where did this come from?
Young people?
Yeah. It's as simple as that.
As simple as that.
Yeah. But there must be something that triggered you at some point. I mean, we're all aware of the fact that there are young people.
Are we all aware of the fact that we work for young people? That's the question.
A good question.
Because the results of what we do today will have consequences on this generation.
Yeah.
This is the first generation that will live their entire life within a world that is irrevocably changed.
Yeah.
My generation was born before, but this generation is living in a world irrevocably changed by us. Therefore, we are responsible.
Yeah.
It's not the young people that are responsible.
Yeah.
Sorry about that, but that's the way it is.
I like your tone of voice, actually, because it's not...
That's my mother tone of voice.
Yeah, yeah, it's good. So I introduced you by saying by telling the whole trajectory, the process you went through to come to the Paris Agreement. That must have been tough. That must have been hard. Are you?
Piece of cake.
Piece of cake, really?
Mm. You just take 196 countries, you lock them up in the room, you say nobody goes to the bathroom, nobody eats, nobody breathes until you all sign this agreement. And that's it, it's done. That was
yeah, but you
very
do
simple.
need to have them...
You just have to have very good locks on the doors.
Yeah, and you need to convince them or lure them to come there in the first place.
Ah, yes, you do have to lure them to come.
Yeah, how did you do that then? Good, good pastry.
Their own self-interest.
Uh-huh.
Who is benefited by a dead planet? No one.
Yeah, okay, but this is, I agree, but this is easier than it really is, right? I mean, it is tough. You have countries like China and America blocking all kinds of ideas.
America would be the United States because America is actually a continent.
Yeah,
I belong to the continent of America. I live in Costa Rica. Let's just
I do the same thing when people talk about Holland, because I'm not from Holland, I'm from Twente, yeah. The United States, but
so
come on,
I
mean, it's tough. It's tough to get this done. It must have been a really tiring process.
You know what is interesting is, yes, it was a several-year process, but it was a process of bringing all representatives from all countries, 196 countries, to realize that it is in their enlightened, and I underline enlightened, self-interest to protect their planet and protect their citizens. And we did work on that with every single country until there was at least enough common ground to be able to develop a legal instrument that is admittedly a macro policy to then be implemented by countries. Where we're falling short now is in the national implementation, and certainly in the corporate implementation thereof. So much as it was difficult to get that international multilateral agreement, we're now into step 2 of implementation and hitting up against new barriers, let's say.
Yeah. So the agreement was not the toughest part. The implementation is the toughest part on the national level.
Well, the agreement was the toughest part at that time.
Yeah.
But you see, we humans, we always love to go for bigger and bigger challenges, higher and higher mountains. So that was the highest mountain at that time, but now we have a higher one, implemented on time.
Yeah.
On time. Because that agreement implemented late will help no one.
Yeah.
It has to be implemented on time.
What are the major challenges when it comes to implementation worldwide?
I think the major challenges now are the lack of seriousness of most governments, European countries excluded. Currently, the United States government excluded, not always historically, as we know. But currently, with huge responsibility, Australia coming on board, New Zealand coming on board, but also still, perhaps with the exception of the new legislation in the United States, still lacking in enough teeth to elicit the kind of progress that is necessary from both the corporate and the financial sector. That's one problem. Yep. The other problem, frankly, is the very deep vested interest of the fossil fuel companies who, especially in the United States, have orchestrated something that I can only qualify as an immoral campaign to intimidate financial institutions that had started to shift their capital into clean technologies, and now those vested interests are actively intimidating those financial institutions. That is immoral. Yeah. Especially in the face of the unprecedented profits that those companies have seen in the last 2 to 3 years.
Yeah. You say that here in Europe and Holland, we are doing our best. We're doing fine. We're at least trying to implement.
But doing our best, is that enough?
Well, I would say we're not doing as good as we could.
Okay.
No, but I mean, we're ambitious people in this room, so what can we do better here in Holland?
Well, go ahead.
Yeah, because usually you get stuck in this discussion where, individuals say the government should do more, or companies should do more, and then companies, they point at the government, we need rules, and they also point at the individuals, by the way, by saying, you need to stop flying, for example. So we are, in Holland at least, a bit in a situation where everybody's just pointing at each other, when we can all do better.
Well, that's exactly the point, because it is not for any one of these sectors to do this alone. No. If we had started this maybe 30 years ago, we could choose one sector and say, well, you take the lead, but we're way too late for that. So at this point, we do need for everyone to be in mutual support of everyone else and stop this finger pointing. This blaming of one sector or the other is going to take us absolutely nowhere. At the same time, we have to realize what you just mentioned, no one is doing enough. Yep. We are in the critical decade. The decade of the 20s is the decisive decade in the history of humanity, without a doubt. The decisive decade. And we know that in order to protect the young generations from the worst effects of climate change, we have to be at 1/2 current global emissions by 2030. That is 7 years from now. We are decisively not on track for that. No. Absolutely not on track. So how can we start to blame one sector or the other or the other? No. We are in a true state of emergency, and everybody is looking around their shoulder. Who else is going to step up? Yeah.
How do you tackle the cynicism that you hear a lot in countries like the Netherlands, when people say, sure, I can buy a electric vehicle, for example, but as long as they don't do anything in China, it doesn't matter.
Well, the fact is that China is doing more for electric vehicles than every other country put together. So let's just get our facts right. Yeah. China has invested more into solar than anybody else.
Yeah, it's Western arrogance in a way.
More into batteries, more into wind, more into buses, electric buses, more into electric charging networks than anybody put together. So, it's just very simple to just pick a country, and I don't know, China always gets picked, to be the responsible country. But they're actually moving much, much quicker than many other countries, surprisingly so, or maybe not.
Yeah.
Because they understand that their competitive advantage is precisely a low-carbon economy.
Yeah.
They cannot continue to compete in this world simply because what they used to use, which was very, very low labor costs, that just doesn't cut it anymore in China. So what is their competitive advantage now? Low carbon, and they are investing into that.
Yeah, and their centralist government makes them probably more interested in the long term.
Indeed. They take the long-term vision and they execute it.
Oh.
At a cost.
At a cost, yeah, let's not go
execute.
into it. We're in Delft, it's too complicated for them. So we're here in a community of students and alumni. How can a group of people, a community that's all about technical solutions contribute to what you're doing, to our whole mission?
Well, there's no doubt. First of all, shout out to this university, right? Ranks one of the top 10 in the world for engineering and technology. Pretty impressive.
Yeah.
Pretty impressive. So it is no surprise to me that the symposium is taking place here because of the leadership of the university. And there is no doubt that technology and engineering are a very, very important component of the transition that we need to make in energy, in transport, in industry, in transport light and heavy, especially in high energy intensive industries. So there's no doubt that that is a very important piece. And it is not the miracle. It cannot be implemented on its own. A, it has to be incentivized. B, it has to be financed. C, it has to really be operated and internalized. It can't just be made available and then assume that that's going to change the world. Just like science data is put out there by scientists assuming that that's going to change the world. It doesn't. It has to be integrated by all of us, the consumers.
Yeah. So when you speak about solutions, you sometimes end up in this discussion where you have two schools of thought. You have people who are fan of the degrowth model, and then you have people who are like tech optimists. I guess naturally you will find more tech optimists here. What's your school of thought? Which camp do you belong to?
Those may be two opinions. I don't think that those are the only two camps.
Okay.
First of all, degrowth is very well and good for Europeans to talk about, but you cannot talk about degrowth in the global south. That is not an argument that is going to take us anywhere.
No.
So we have to just realize that degrowth is a privileged argument of the global north.
Yeah. Which is not popular here.
Not
anyway.
popular here.
No. I mean, who wants to have less than their parents? Also in Holland, that's a problematic thing to sell.
So can you imagine how popular it's going to be in the south?
Yeah. Okay. Continue. Sorry. Yeah.
Technological fixes are important. I'm very much for technology, but it can't be on its own. It's not just the technology. It's the entire economic structure. It's the consumer behavior. It's the choices. It's the political decisions. It's the entire network of our society that needs to change. We can't just put a technological Band-Aid. That is very, very important and central, but not sufficient.
Yeah. You seem to be an optimist. What are the things that make you optimistic about the future? How can we make it? The goals that you set in the Paris Agreement?
I think we can do it. I still think that we can do it. Why do I think so? Because, not only because the science is very, very clear, but because I see movement, for example, in the financial sector, that is beginning to move toward much better investments, being stopped now, which is outrageous, in the United States and bleeding into Europe. I also see huge technological advances in hydrogen, for example, in electrolyzers that are going to be able to seep into energy-intensive industries. I see much movement in transport. Of course, light transport, I would just sort of put a check on it because I think those technological problems have been largely solved, but more how do we then move into heavy transport, into aviation, into shipping, which is really, and containers. But what makes me very excited is the exponential curve that we see in renewable energy for electricity production. That is solar, wind, and now battery storage coming online also in exponential fashion. So all that piece is very, very hopeful. But what you see is that each of these are on an exponential curve of a different grade. So renewables much steeper than transport than the other sectors. And we have completely forgotten about the land use sector, completely forgotten about them. That is a sector that has not even started its transformation. And there is at least a quarter, if not a third, of greenhouse gas emissions in that sector.
Land use, you mean farming?
Yes, farming, agriculture, deforestation, everything to do with land use.
Well, we know a thing or two about that by now in Holland. Thank you so much, Christian.
Can I just say one thing?
One thing.
A while ago, I was invited to give a talk that was entitled The Path Forward, and I was on crutches. I thought, this is going to be very ironic. Today, I was invited to speak to Vision, and I have an eye infection. And I thought, is this always going to happen to me? That whatever the topic is, I have my physical limitations that deal with that. And I think that is a beautiful life lesson. Because whether we are moving forward onto the path of the future, we know that we are still depending on these damn crutches. Or whether we're trying to see into the future, we know that we still have our eyes closed and blind. And that is not a reason to be blind or to stay still. We have to move forward.
Thank you. Christiana Figueres, thank you.